the two topics that we're going to start on tonight when it comes to thinking well are going to be two kind of polar opposites. See, in the laws of the body, the next laws that we have to understand that there are laws of the mind, which are typically a lot of our destructive emotions, and then there are laws of the spirit, and those are our instructive, or how we could probably say freeing emotions, or healthy those emotions. So this probably been said many a times, and people might have thought we were having some sort of a spiritual revival tonight. The biggest thing is that we want you to understand that faith over fear helps your body be healthy, happy, and peaceful. Faith in whatever it is you have faith in is more important than no faith. And when I can kind of summarize what I would look at here is that without faith, it's like a boat without a rudder. Now you're going to be kind of tossed about the sea, wherever the sea takes us. Things will happen in our lives that are not how we planned, not what we hoped for. And it's these things that, without faith, can really get us into a fearful and destructive and dominating place. I'd like to, if anyone can even wants to open their line or just add to this, but I want to, if you think about, if you have a piece of paper right now, I'd like you to almost draw a line down the middle. And I want you to put faith on one side and fear on the other. So you've got a line, you got faith, and you've got fear. I'd like to try to kind of take notes or just have you guys spit out. When you think of faith, is there another word that comes to mind? Or if you think of fear, is there a word that comes to mind? Let's start with faith first. Or actually, let's start with fear. Let's start with fear. I have a lot of things written down from the book, but just remember that fear can lead to many other emotions. But what are some of the words that come to mind? You can type them in too if you guys want, or you can unmute your mic. What are some of the words or thoughts that come about when you think of fear? Go ahead. I'm ready. Loss of control, chaos. Very good. Very good. Thank you. Anything else hit home with anyone? Doesn't have to. It's fine. I've got plenty of words to read. Uncertainty. Stress. Yeah. Fear. It's very stressful. I don't think anyone has ever, oh, there's a lot of fear going on and I'm not stressed right now. False evidence appearing real. Ah, yeah. Going deep. That's good. There's a movie I think Will Smith was in when he brought that one up. I can't remember where else it comes from. Yeah, that's if we could sum it up for a lack of trust, lack of trust. Well, so what is so a lack of trust is fear, which means the polar opposite there, Lisa, would be faith, right? That we trust. We trust that we were, and this is something you have to decide for yourself. I'm not telling you that this is, has to be the truth, but you have to decide, are we here for a reason? Are we here on this planet to not only just support ourselves or make ourselves happy, but to serve others? Are we here for a reason? Is there a big enough reason that we're here that things are going to work out? That there's going to be things and challenges in our life, but there's a plan for that. I mean, how many times has someone probably in hindsight realized that a very bad situation was probably a blessing in disguise for so many reasons? It could be cliche. We could just say these things and when one door closes, another opens. But if you're just fearful of what's that next door versus having some faith in what that next door is going to lead to, your body physiologically, even if there was no spiritual component to any of this, physiologically, I want you to think about faith and fear this way, very simply. Fear is fight or flight. Your stress hormones in fear are going to increase. If you live in a lot of fear, if every moment of every day there's something that could be scary and fearful and you think about it, then your physiology is turning your body into that fight or flight machine, chronic stress. You start to think about adrenal fatigue. Those are your stress glands. I see people, we're starting to test some people's, saliva, blood, different things for cortisol levels. And what we can see is patterns of chronic stress. that eventually wear our body out. They cause increased pain. They cause sleeplessness, energy, lack of energy, all the things that can start to happen that we might start seeking a drug, a pill, a potion, or lotion could really turn back all the way to the fact that if we could start to retrain our brain from fear to faith, that our body could start to actually reboot into that resting and digesting phase. So if I'm starting to break this down the page, think faith and fear. I want you to think fear is very destructive to your body. It disturbs every makeup of the human being. Body, mind, and soul is disturbed with fear. Fight or flight is another thing I want to put in that column. Fear causes a paralysis of growth. Fear leads to a lack of confidence, unhappiness, doubt, anxiety, worry, dread, even hatred, anger, horror, fright, and shock all come from fear. We were built to experience fear for a reason. It should be a warning to us. Fear is not something that is unnatural. Fear is going to happen, but fear is just a warning. Fear is a warning to our bodies that danger may be around. It may be approaching. It keeps us alive. When we were very primitive, we had to have some gut feeling of fear to know that there is some danger lurking around, that we should protect ourselves. But unfortunately, the more that we read sometimes, the more that, look at the weather right now. The only thing that sells weather, that weather tries to get our attention, is fear. The roads are going to be bad. It's going to be a big storm. There's more storms approaching. There are some storms brewing. Well, there probably always are storms brewing. There's very likely always a chance that there's going to be a storm. But we have to have faith that we're in the right place, doing the right things, going in the right direction. And when we can start to just have some glimmer of that faith, we can start to dispel some of that fear. The things I wanted to kind of note, kind of going back and forth a little bit. I kind of wrote some of these down, like you're saying, is when we keep things simple and we're obedient to the laws, faith is natural. Our bodies naturally are healthy. But when we're in that mental state that is of disquiet, unrest, unease, that is what I consider dis-ease. Chiropractors have been talking about dis-ease for the longest time. Dis-ease means a lack of harmony, lack of balance in our body. When our mind is at unrest and it's a disquiet, then we've caused dis-ease. Dis-ease, a lack of ease in our bodies, eventually leads to disease, symptoms, problems. But the first thing is some dis-ease or dysfunction. So faith, really, on the other hand here, it magnifies strength, courage, and power. When we think of words, if we just say words, I don't know how many may have been on this before, but there's a study that was done with water. And this Japanese scientist, I think he was Japanese, scientist would take water and he would speak words at this water, and then he'd freeze it. He would look at the crystalline structures that were formed after he spoke to the water under a microscope. Words like faith and hope, and love, and these words like strength and courage caused the crystals under the microscope to have like perfect formation. They were beautifully formed. When we started to say other words with fear, hatred, anger, when I just say them, they change the vibrations inside of you and inside of me. Those vibrations can cause us to become disconnected and dis-eased, or they can bring us back to ease. And so realized that those structures, when he looked at them under the microscope with those negative sort of emotions or destructive emotions, they had dysfunctional crystal formation. They looked like they'd been at a rock concert, so to speak. They were all shooken up. I will try to find the link to that. I used to share it. Now I don't remember it, but it's on YouTube. You could probably search it somehow, and you'll see a little video about music and words and thoughts, even just thoughts. Remember, I say thoughts are things. Can change the structure of water, which means that vibrational energy does not just stay inside of us, it surrounds us. We want to start to retrain our bodies and our brains to surround ourselves with good vibrations. Faith is one of the first steps. This is the very first one that we start with, is faith. Healing requires faith. This is another thing I thought was pretty interesting in the book. It was kind of quoted this, but it says healing requires faith for effective treatment. How many people have heard of the placebo effect? If I have trust and faith that this pill or potion or whatever it is, this chiropractor, this healer is going to help me, you have a really good chance of having a better outcome in your treatment than if you do not believe it's going to work. If you don't believe it's going to work, there's a good chance it may not. So faith is vital to healing. This is a quote in the book where I appreciated this because I thought it was quite interesting. Some people will call Christ the great healer. And they would say even Christ recognized that faith was necessary to cure. I mean, how many times do you say the faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains? But there's times even in the Bible where Jesus would talk about faith is why you were healed. You may not be Christian. You may not understand what we're saying. I'm not trying to sway that and that opinion. What I want you to know is that book talked about how important faith is to the healing process. And I can tell you how many patients come into our office having faith that this is going to be the right direction. And I see things happen, miracles to their body that I probably don't believe can happen. And it's because there's faith in there. I'm going to try. I always have hope. By the way, that's next month, by the way. That is our next month's is hope. But we want to leave with hope always. But we have to have some faith in the process. So having that faith is very important. How do we start to change over? How do we shift the tide? Because living in fear is not your fault. Living in fear is not that you're a bad person. Living in fear isn't because you did something wrong. We are trained to live in fear. To be honest, I think society wants us fearful and sick and uneducated because we're easier to govern that way. But we have learned as a young child, remember that most of our reactions and emotions happen before we were 8 years old. And so even if you start to believe and have faith that there's a different way to start to live your life, that you don't have to be in fear, you have to rewrite that program that has been on, record and practiced for maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years, maybe 30, maybe 40, maybe 50, maybe 100. So how do we start to shift the tide? Well, there's 4 simple steps, I guess. I don't know if they're simple, but there's 4 steps. If we want to start to retrain our bodies to believing and to having faith, to being strong and courageous, then we first need to find out the cause or what we are so fearful of. We need to find why am I in fear? What really keep asking, even digging into it. Well, I'm afraid because I might get hurt in the car when I go out there and to drive. I could be hit by a car. Okay. Well, what makes you think you're going to get hit, right? Start asking those questions. Find out what's really the cause of this fear. Because understanding it probably goes back to some rooted emotion that you've had in that situation, very likely. You don't like social situations, or very likely in school, maybe. Just maybe you were in that social situation, you got made fun of. There was someone who didn't treat you right, so you don't want to go out and put yourself on the line and be made fun of again. Find out the cause. You can do this yourself, but chances are you may need some support. But number 1, find out the cause. Why? What? What are you afraid of? Can you then, step 2 would be eliminate this fear. Can you eliminate it through intelligent action? What do I mean by that? Well, there's a statement that we love to use in I do a lot of life coaching. I coach other chiropractors. I've been coached many times by many people and continue to see counseling myself. What I can tell you is that action dissolves fear. It's very, very common that we're paralyzed by fear. We could have a paralysis by analysis. If we analyze all the things that could happen, all the things that could go wrong, there's very likely we would never do anything. we might not step our foot outside anymore if we have that kind of analysis paralysis. Taking the action can dissolve our fears. That may be as simple as saying, I'm going to get in the car and I'm going to drive on the highway. I'm afraid of going too fast. I'm afraid of going far, but I'm going to go. And when we reach that conclusion of the end, you say to yourself, it didn't happen. What are the likelihood? Maybe you have to intelligently look at the statistics. How many people get in accidents? How many cars are on the road? I don't know what it is, but intelligently you can work through these things yourself. But if you're just going on sheer emotion, it's going to be hard to work through the steps. You have to be outside of that fearful emotion. Number one is find out what the cause is. Maybe try to eliminate that fear through intelligent action. Remember, action dissolves fear. I find that for most people, it probably is going to be hard to maybe even take those steps or if we look at life through the same lens that created our own stress, if we try to fix a stress within the same thought process that created it, it's going to be hard to fix. So remember that we might need outside looks. We might need someone to look at this in a different way. So seeking a counselor, a therapist, a healer, different people to try to help you through some of these fears intelligently and through steps takes time, but worth the effort. Analyzing the fear is very important. That's kind of the last step, is really analyzing that fear. I appreciate, Rhonda, you brought it up. I'm sure Joe too, but that fear, I want you to probably write down these couple things. Number one is that action dissolves fear. Number two is the acronym of what we say fear stands for. Fear ultimately is false expectations appearing real. There's that statement, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. Fear is a perception into the future that we would never know. We cannot know. Fear ultimately is us projecting something can happen that did not and has not. It's false expectations appearing real. I'm saying all these things to try to help start to conceptualize where fear comes from and how do we start to take action against it. Very simply, if you read the chapters, you'll understand that it makes a lot of sense to start to dig into faith. Just, do you have faith in something? Is there faith that you have that things will be better? Will they get better? And that's going to take time for some people, for sure. It may take years. But I can tell you that the laws of the body and the mind are concrete. I don't think there's anyone that says that bitterness and confusion, a lack of physical inharmony is a good thing. The more negative that we think, the more sick we become. Ultimately, fear leads to neurosis. Life has no plan or no meaning. When we get into these statements, our bodies start to become more sick. And when we look into the faith aspect of this, we look at positivity, manifesting happiness and health and peace again. There are so many steps that I kind of could go through and look at with this, but I think the point is made